Hello, I'm Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this Wednesday evening, August 16th West Weather Update, brought to you by Nutrient Ag Solutions. The biggest story across the western U.S. over the next 7 days is certainly going to be potential Hurricane Hilary. Now, I say potential because it was just recently named a tropical storm from the National Hurricane Center here this morning. That's the satellite loop we're looking at here, an infrared satellite imagery of Tropical Storm Hilary in the far eastern Pacific. To kind of orient us here, off to the northeast part of this image is the southwest Mexican coastline. And here's Tropical Storm Hilary. Now, a few things kind of jump off the screen right away and looking at this as we see some very powerful, deep tropical convection or tropical thunderstorms attempting to spin around the center of Tropical Storm Hilary here. That's indicative to us that this storm might be strengthening here. Specifically, if you look kind of over those last few frames here, you can see these powerful thunderstorms attempting to spin or rotate around the core or the center of the circulation here of this storm. That typically is an indication that the storm has aspirations of developing into a hurricane as it tries to make that more defined eye or eye wall. So not a surprise, I think, tonight if this makes a run at hurricane status. In fact, if we look at the National Hurricane Center forecast, they are actually forecasting it to strengthen into a hurricane by tomorrow morning on Thursday. I think that's just based on the satellite loop here, likely to be the case. If we jump out and take a broader look at this, it is a pretty broad storm at the moment. So we just kind of looked at that inner core here. We have thunderstorms, tropical convection, this cloud field expanding over a much broader area. Now, there is a chance that that kind of broader circulation could limit the strengthening just here over the next 24 to 48 hours. But just given how mean it looks, those powerful storms over that center of circulation, it's kind of clear that the storm has bigger aspirations than just a tropical storm. We see that in the forecast that we'll get into in just a bit. It definitely passes the eye test, does not look like your typical or a pedestrian tropical storm here in the eastern Pacific. If we jump over and look at the National Hurricane Center, we can see kind of what we're talking about here. So the forecast is by tomorrow morning on Thursday, hurricane status here in the eastern Pacific for Hurricane Hilary. As we go forward in time toward Friday, the forecast right now from the National Hurricane Center actually strengthening this into a major hurricane, which would be indicative of Category 3 strength or higher. And unfortunately, those are the ones that can cause quite a bit of issues. Now, importantly, it's worth mentioning, certainly for the southwestern U.S., that as it gets closer to the Cabo Peninsula, we've talked about this kind of all summer, that you go from pretty warm water here in the eastern Pacific to much cooler water here off the coast of California and off the coast of the Baja here. So if this storm does go on this kind of trajectory, this track here, we would expect a pretty quick weakening once it reaches some sort of line right about here. So we're expecting weakening after that, potentially down to a tropical storm as it nears the southwestern U.S. proper. Nonetheless, still likely to pick up a lot of atmospheric moisture on its way, being a tropical storm coming out of the tropics in those warm ocean waters like they have there, and expecting it to be a big rainmaker for the southwestern U.S. We'll get into all that in a bit here. One thing I did want to mention is if you look at the forecast cone here, so we kind of call this the cone of uncertainty, if you will, it's one of the more narrow ones. So we have good forecast confidence here from the National Hurricane Center that the storm likely to stay within this cone here, which puts it on a trajectory, even a beeline, if you will, toward the southern coastline or at least the southern border of southwest Arizona or California. And that's why I think we're looking at a big weather maker here for the western U.S. over the next 7 days. This forecast takes us all the way out to Monday of next week. So we're really talking about a 5-day forecast. And we know that once we go from 5 days to 7 days or beyond, that forecast uncertainty tends to increase. So we'll break that down here as we go through the video. One thing I did want to cover quickly is why this hurricane is coming up toward the southwestern U.S. versus maybe careening off into the Pacific or toward the west or even Hawaii. And it really comes back to the upper level height fields. These stronger hurricanes are often driven or what we call steered by the upper level winds in the atmosphere. It's why we call them the steering flow or the steering winds. And if I make this forecast from the ECMWF, I'll make it valid here as of Friday. That's when that storm is expected to approach potentially major hurricane status. I can see kind of two features here that are really responsible for that steering. One is this big upper level ridge over the central part of the country here, over the central U.S. This is going to bring a lot of heat into the middle part of the country and parts of the Corn Belt. But these upper level ridges, the winds blow around them in a clockwise fashion. I'll kind of draw the arrows here. So expecting kind of a clockwise turning in the winds in the upper level height field here. But if you look off the coastline of California, we actually see an upper level low here. And the winds come around here in a counterclockwise fashion. So in between the low, in between that ridge toward the east, we're expecting these kind of steering winds to be pulling the storm up in toward the southwestern U.S. And that's why that forecast track has it coming up into the southwestern U.S. at some sort of trajectory like the ones drawing there. And I did want to mention that as kind of the reasoning for that heightened confidence in that forecast track. Now, despite the strengthening we talked about, whether it reaches Category 3, Category 4, there is some uncertainty there. What there's not as much uncertainty in is how much moisture this is bringing to the western U.S. The biggest story over the next 7 days regarding this storm specifically for the U.S. will be rainfall. And I'll show you some of that moisture here. If I take this forecast out toward Friday as it starts to come into view, the hurricane that is, we can see all the anomalous moisture that the storm is picking up in the eastern Pacific. Being a tropical storm coming out of the tropics, we expect them to lift a pretty incredible amount of moisture up into the atmosphere. And that steering flow that I talked about is going to be steering that upper level moisture right into the southwestern U.S., such that some of the rain and the storms from the hurricane might start as early as late Friday or even Saturday, well before the storm proper even pushes up into the area. You saw those forecasts really all the way out to Monday when the storm is starting to get into the area. So could see rainfall even as early as Saturday as a result of Hurricane Hilary here. If I take this forecast out into Sunday, into Monday, we can see all that anomalous moisture now spreading across the western U.S. So big rainfall maker, big rainfall event, I think is going to be the biggest story out of this. There will be a wind component that we'll want to talk about, but certainly the biggest threat to life and property for the western U.S. and agriculture will be the rainfall, potentially excessive at times. One thing we have noticed in that forecast track is a bit of a split in the models. Now, this is getting out to 5 to 6 days in the forecast, so there's some uncertainty here always. One kind of grouping we're looking at is from the ECMWF. So if we look at all the ensemble members from the European model, if I make this forecast out valid all the way towards Sunday and then into Monday evening, we can see a lot of these members staying just offshore here off the far southwest coast of California. This would bring more of the wind and rain impacts in toward the coastline of California, particularly on the southwest side here. Now, it wouldn't change the forecast wholesale. We'd still likely see a lot of rain, potentially some wind move into parts of southwestern Arizona, southeast California, even getting into Nevada. But it would focus more of those direct effects, more of the higher rainfall amounts, more landslide risk and wind on the coast to parts of coastal California. Whereas if we jump over and look at the GFS valid at that same time here, getting in toward Sunday evening and then Monday, you notice it takes that track ever so slightly closer to the coastline, even some of these members trying to cross over the Baja Peninsula. Now, there's some precedent there, and what I mean by that is some storms have in the past jumped over the peninsula and gotten in to the Imperial Valley, parts of southwestern Arizona, into Yuma, coming up the bay there. So want to keep an eye on these two different forecast tracks. The whole area likely to receive excessive rainfall from that, but it would shift the most direct impacts a bit toward the east here, at least for this GFS model. Track a little bit further to the east here would potentially heighten the impacts to parts of the lower Colorado River Valley, more so than that ECMWF solution I just showed you on the slide before. I think we'll know more here as we get toward Friday, as we get some of the more data in. We get an idea of how strong the storm is, can often determine those slight shifts in the track. So we'll keep an eye on the two there. Again, the big story here is going to be water. If we look at the total precipitation forecasts all the way into next week, all the way out to August 24th now, this is just from the ECMWF. We can see widespread across much of the western U.S., looking at an inch plus of rainfall. Anywhere we kind of get into this orange and red color is where we're seeing 2 inches plus of rainfall. So a lot of rainfall, despite the ECMWF being the more western solution of the two, still seeing a lot of rainfall get into parts of Nevada, the lower Colorado River Valley, up along the coast of California. This would be a major mudslide risk for parts of southwestern and the central coastline here, parts of California. The Central Valley even getting in on some of the rain showers here, and potentially parts of the North Valley as well. So widespread rainmaking event. I will say the ECMWF even getting way out into the forecast into the next work week is a little bit wetter for parts of the Pacific Northwest, especially for the Willamette Valley. So I want to keep an eye on that because this is an area that could use some rainfall. I don't know if getting it from a hurricane was exactly how we planned it, but nonetheless can't plan exactly how these things pan out here as we get into the hurricane season. Now, that's just the ECMWF. That was that kind of western solution. I'm going to jump over and look at the same kind of precip-total map from the GFS, and you'll notice that kind of dramatic shift toward the east. So a lot of these areas still see quite a significant amount of rainfall. I'll make that color jump off the screen a little bit better here, rather than the light green over the green here. So while we do see some of the same areas getting quite a bit of rainfall, that eastern shift ever so slightly more toward kind of the landmass here. We see a lot higher values in parts of the desert Southwest, parts of the lower Colorado River Valley, more widespread 2 inches plus across parts of Nevada, even western Nevada. So depending on which solution kind of wins out here might change and shift that forecast a bit, but nonetheless, an area receiving quite a bit of rainfall here for late August. If I had to kind of pick which one, if you kind of force me to pick which one I think is correct, it's hard to say so early. There's kind of weaknesses and strengths, I think, in each model solution. The GFS might have a bit better handle on how quickly the storm strengthens. It kind of strengthens into a very powerful storm, similar to how the National Hurricane Center is forecasting it. But you'll notice as it reaches the Baja, that's when that ocean temperature cools pretty rapidly. And the GFS has had issues with this in the past, keeping the storm a little bit too strong, too long after it gets into that cooler water. And you can kind of see that it keeps a very strong storm actually making landfall here toward the Baja Peninsula, even after passing into the much colder ocean waters here off that coastline here. So might have more of the strengthening down in the kind of early part of the forecast, but seems to kind of keep that strengthening a bit too overzealous on that out later into the forecast toward Monday. Is that the reasoning why it's pushing further east into the landmass here? I'm not quite sure. It does pose some skepticism on that a little bit. ECMWF taking this a little bit more out to sea, which is focusing more of those winds and the rainfall across the southwest and central coastline of California. Again, hard to say which one is the more correct one at the time. We tend to lean toward the ECMWF in these moments. It has in the past had a little bit better handle on it, but I don't want to discount the possibility that we do get one of these storms to cross the Baja Peninsula, just because we've seen that in the past. And I wouldn't, put it out of the realm of possibilities here, which would increase the wind and the rainfall potential for the lower Colorado River Valley cities like Blythe, Imperial, Yuma, Arizona, etc. If we look over at the sea surface temperatures here in the eastern Pacific, well, here is Tropical Storm Hilary spinning kind of somewhere down here in very warm ocean waters. It's expected to track along these warm ocean waters toward the northwest. We know these warm ocean waters are kind of fuel for these hurricanes, so not a surprise to see from the National Hurricane, from some of these models, that we're looking at a powerful storm over the next 72 hours. Now, like I said, when it gets toward the Baja Peninsula and crosses toward the north or northwest of that, the water temperatures cool pretty rapidly. So 30 degrees Celsius, kind of high 80 degrees Fahrenheit. You can think water, very warm, more than pleasant to swim in. But as you cross that line, you get into low 70s, even high 60s in terms of temperature, and those are not nearly as comfortable to even sit in or swim in, and the hurricane's not going to like that as well, so expecting weakening. But as we saw even with some of these storms earlier this year, they can still retain a lot of that momentum or the inertia and can have a strong wind field and can certainly pack a lot of rainfall and moisture despite losing some of that kind of more extreme hurricane activity. If we look at the National Weather Service, their prediction over the next 7 days for precipitation, they're kind of going with a broader kind of rainfall shield here, if you will. I think what they're doing here is they're counting for both possibilities. I think that's the right thing to do. We see kind of a wide swath of 1.5 inches plus along the central and southwestern coastline of California, but we also see higher values, 2 inches plus across the lower Colorado River Valley, even getting into parts of central and eastern Arizona here, values potentially up toward an inch or more. I think, again, they're kind of keeping track as to, is it going to go toward the west or toward the east a little bit here? Nonetheless, still expecting quite a bit of rain to fall in this area, regardless of where that track goes specifically. I think where there's more uncertainty, if we get something of a more western track like the ECMWF, could increase rainfall values for parts of northern California or the Willamette Valley, and would likely increase the wind impacts to parts of the coastline as well. If we look over at those wind gusts from the ECMWF, these are looking at maximum wind gusts over the next 7 days. These are likely peaking on Monday and Tuesday as the storm pushes up into the area. And again, we can see widespread 40 to 50, maybe even pushing 60 mile an hour wind gusts as the storm comes up along the southern and central coastline from the ECMWF. If it does get more toward, like I said, that landmass, that Baja Peninsula tries to sneak up more toward kind of the Imperial County area, those winds now shifting more toward the east. You can see more wind gusts kind of centered over Nevada and the lower Colorado River Valley, with that storm trying to push more up inland into parts of Southern California. If we Look at some of the different models here forecasting this track going forward. Again, kind of high confidence in this track pushing north, but whether it sticks off the coastline here into Baja or whether it goes more over land, there's kind of the split here on day 4 to 5 that we're keeping a close eye on, potentially updating you all here as we get closer to the weekend with another special video update to give some more confidence to the situation. Looking at the ECMWF ensemble for precipitation anomalies, again, looking out over the next 7 days, the story pretty clear here that regardless of the exact track, looking at a widespread area of anomalous rainfall with the most extreme values down here in Southern California, parts of western Arizona, southern Nevada, perhaps getting into western Nevada as well. The forecast I just showed you from the National Weather Service, from the ECMWF, and even the GFS showed values maybe at the most, at the highest, around 2, 3, maybe 4 inches, but it's likely at some of the elevations here and some specific local amounts could be in excess of that. So some municipalities could see as much as 6 inches, maybe even more, falling on some mountainous areas, or huge flash flooding risk, huge landslide risk, certainly in coastal California. So not just kind of maxing out at 2 inches here. I think we could go well over that in some of these local municipalities. So certainly heed the warnings and alerts from your local county or city here as we get more toward game time for this event. It feels kind of ridiculous to spin toward other hurricanes and tropical storm activity, but I did want to mention some of these before the end of the video. We are tracking 2 tropical storms close to the state of Hawaii here. Just to the south of Hawaii is a pretty weak tropical storm Greg. This is expected to move west, west-southwest, kind of out of the area here. Pretty weak right now. If we take a closer look at Greg on the satellite imagery here, here's that tropical storm spinning well to the south of the Big Island here. Increasing winds just a bit on the north side here. We can actually see these winds moving a little bit quicker than that kind of typical trade wind flow a bit further to the north. But fortunately not seeing an impact or an indirect impact like we saw from Dor, with very strong winds moving over the island. No wind warnings out as of now, no red flag warnings active last I checked. So this is expected to continue to weaken as it moves toward the west. Fortunately right now being more of a non-factor for the state. Spinning just off screen here is Tropical Storm Fernanda. It was once a pretty powerful hurricane further east in the Pacific, weakened pretty quickly as it got into that cooler water here east of Hawaii. It does look pretty neat if we look at it here on the visible satellite imagery here. Very few thunderstorms still even spinning around it here. It just kind of has this ghostly spin. Like I said, when these storms weaken, they still retain a lot of that kind of momentum and inertia in that spin. So it's cool to see the kind of skeletal remains, if you will, from what was a powerful hurricane. This is forecast to get pretty close to the island of Hawaii here. I'll look at the ECMWF forecast to give you an idea of that. As we go through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, into Monday, we see almost an open wave, so not even a closed storm at this point, potentially losing any advisories from the National Hurricane Center, passing just to the south of the Big Island. This would likely increase wind some, could get some gusty winds, likely below damaging threshold. Might get some increased rainfall here on the Big Island, perhaps lesser so to the further to the north than that. Not expecting a huge event here, but perhaps some inclement weather on Monday evening, getting into Tuesday. About the same time, the story is going to ramp up over on the western U.S., in the continental U.S. For Hurricane Hilary. Fortunately, Greg nor Fernanda here expected to be a major weather story for Hawaii as they unfortunately continue to clean up the wildfires on Maui. Again, it feels silly to talk about more tropical activity even after Hilary being the main story right now. But as Hilary moves toward the north-northwest, expecting even beyond that, 6 to 7 days from now, even more development coming in the eastern Pacific. We looked earlier at those water temperatures down here, just very, very warm, likely breeding ground for more hurricanes. This was the expectation as we went into the season that El Nino would increase hurricane activity in the eastern Pacific, and we've unfortunately seen a very impactful and active season thus far. And it's only August. We're not done yet, so I would suspect that next week, the week after, still some tropical activity to talk about. Finally, kind of catching us up to just kind of what's going on now in the forecast. If we look at the National Weather Service advisories valid as a Wednesday evening, Wednesday afternoon here across the West, unfortunately, excessive heat warnings have returned. Last week kind of had a break from this. Excessive heat warnings returning to eastern Washington, parts of the Willamette Valley, even parts of northern California, with heat advisories expanding kind of well beyond that here across really the whole northwest quadrant here. Daytime high values here, pretty hot, above triple digits here in eastern Washington underneath those excessive heat warnings. Willamette Valley trying to push near 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We actually have wildfire smoke kind of lingering. That could be keeping temperatures down just a bit, but almost at that point adding insult to injury here in the Willamette Valley, an area that's very dry at the moment. Pretty hot here, heat advisory status across the Central Valley of California, not as extreme as we saw in July, but nonetheless some of that heat persisting into August here. The kind of good news is when I took you and showed you that kind of steering flow from earlier, one of the pieces of that was that upper level low kind of positioning itself right off the western U.S. So if we jump back and look at that forecast valid as of Friday evening of this week on August 18th, we have this kind of upper level trough pushing into the area, that upper level low here, and both of those combined are going to work to bring temperatures down before the encroachment of Hurricane Hilary here. So losing the heat, I think, across much of the western U.S., but gaining a new problem in Hurricane Hilary here. If I jump back and look at the forecast for those daily highs from the National Weather Service, this is valid as a Wednesday afternoon, kind of right at the recording of this video. But as I take this through Thursday, you see the temperatures walk back for the Willamette Valley, parts of the Central Valley, still pretty warm here in the eastern Washington area, trying to push near triple digits in the western Snake River Valley, but a little bit cooler than that toward the east. Even cooler going into Friday as that upper level trough works into the area. Cooler on Saturday, much cooler on Sunday and Monday as we really get that big moisture plume, clouds and rain pushing over much of the southwestern U.S. and even getting parts further into the Central Valley of California, across Nevada, and potentially clouds and rain getting into Washington and Idaho later in the week on Tuesday and Wednesday, keeping temperatures down pretty much across the board for folks across the western U.S. Look across the satellite picture right now across the northwestern U.S. We talked about those wildfires burning in Oregon, I should say. This is the Cascades right here, so seeing some wildfires there. Some of that smoke kind of lingering parts of the Willamette Valley. Some air quality alerts, unfortunately, out for some of these counties here. We do see a wildfire burning here in the southern British Columbia area, and that smoke moving off toward the southeast. Likely this smoke that we see here is from fires burning further north up into Canada, but this was a concern we had going into August with a lot of the drought lingering in this area as heat built in. We had the dryness lingering. You get some dry thunderstorms on top of that, and you can spark some wildfires. We even saw some dry thunderstorms in Northern California, spark some wildfires down here. The good news for kind of the fire situation is as Hurricane Hilary pushes into the area, a lot of clouds, cold weather. We typically don't see dry thunderstorms for hurricanes. They're typically pretty wet if they are thundering at all, which isn't very common in these kind of hurricane thunder storms and showers. So could put kind of a dampening and a break to the wildfire situation as we get into next week. But nonetheless, if we look at soil moisture deficits in the Pacific Northwest, kind of a huge deficit bullseye here over the Willamette Valley. And this is looking at soil moisture even relative to normal for this time of year. So very dry, kind of off the color bar dry for parts of the Willamette Valley, an area that's unfortunately pretty moisture starved. And despite or expecting some ill effects from Hurricane Hilary, might not necessarily be a bad thing if it does work some rain into the western Oregon area. If that's the case, we're looking more for kind of an ECMWF western solution to that track. Quickly wanted to take you through that ECMWF rainfall forecast over the next 7 days. Obviously, Hurricane Hilary going to kind of dominate the pattern here. So as early, like I said, as early as Friday and Saturday, that moisture plume extending up into the southwest. So looking at potential rain, thunderstorms, monsoonal activity across the desert southwest as that moves into the area. As Hilary gets even closer, that widespread heavy rainfall likely to move in across the region here, talking about 2 inches plus, could get up to 5 to 6 and beyond in some of these elevated municipalities here. And concerned again on the coastline for mudslides and potentially a wind gust risk if that hurricane takes a more westerly track. Play this all the way here through Tuesday out into Wednesday of next week. If we look at Tuesday evening into Wednesday, we can see some of that rainfall from this ECMWF solution trying to work itself into western Oregon here. The GFS takes things more toward the interior west, leaving Oregon, parts of Washington a little bit drier. If you look even beyond that, so getting out into Thursday and Friday of next week, getting way out into the forecast here, we do see some lingering troughing hanging off the western U.S., and that could even be supported a little bit by Hurricane Hilary weakening in this area. So with that troughing here lingering, that is going to probably increase some upper level flow and moisture into the area. We still have this big high here in the central part of the country. And we talked kind of at the beginning of the video how that steering flow can help to bring some moisture into this area, even regardless of whether there's a hurricane or not. So with that kind of clockwise flow around the trough, the clockwise flow around the ridge, and the counterclockwise flow around the trough could keep the chances for rainfall, at least elevated moisture, increased across the western U.S. That could mean some amplified monsoonal activity for parts of the desert southwest. It could mean increased thunderstorm chances across the Pacific Northwest, an area where we're unfortunately seeing some drought build into the area. So I don't think that's bad news looking in the long-term forecast. If we look at the 6 to 10 day precipitation anomaly chart, we can see the effects of Hilary even all the way out into next week. So this forecast kind of starting Tuesday, going through the next work week, Monday through the next work week, I should say. We see a big bullseye here across the western U.S. for rainfall as that storm works up into parts of California, Nevada, and Oregon. But even if I take this beyond that, beyond kind of the immediate effects of Hilary into that 8 to 14 day outlook, we still see a wide swath of above average precip likely for the western U.S., I think as a result of that flow kind of pushing more moisture into the area, potentially getting some thunderstorms into eastern Washington, parts of western Idaho, and hopefully parts of the Willamette Valley, especially if we avoid some of these dry thunderstorms, which could spark up more wildfires, potentially seeing a more active monsoonal activity as well as a result of that flow. That's really what we have for the long-range forecast. Our attention, certainly in the meantime, turning back to Tropical Storm Hilary. Expecting tomorrow morning to wake up to Hurricane Hilary. We'll kind of watch and see how this develops toward the northwest here, potentially giving another special video update later in the week when we have better confidence as to which track it's leaning toward, whether it kind of looks more toward that western coastline track or it's going to try to peel up more into the lower Colorado River Valley. There could be some implications in the forecast as a result. That is all I have for you all this evening. Stay safe, and thanks for watching.